Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to HTML Lesson 8. Today we're going to be talking about forms. Now, forms are actually just a way that we gather information. So when you think about a form that you sign up with your doctor or your school, you're always giving them information. And there's a couple different formats that you might give that information to them. Now, what are some examples of when you might use a form? Well, those are called form controls in HTML. Now, the first example is just a simple text input. It's useful for single lines like usernames, as you can see. And then also there's a password input. This is going to be just like the single line text, but it's going to hide the characters. As I'm sure you're familiar with, you don't want people that are looking behind you to be able to see your password. Now, if you've ever seen that little eye indicator to the right of a password, that if you click on it, it shows you your password, that is just the changing the type from password to text. So that's how you can actually see that. The next type is a radio button, which is, as you can see here, they're like the little buttons that you can only select one of. They're useful for quizzes and allowing to select a single option from multiple. Then there's checkboxes, and that allows you to select multiple options as opposed to one with the radio button, and you can actually go ahead and choose multiple options there. Then there's the drop-down boxes, which is very common for when you're selecting a country or state or anything like that. And then finally we have the submit button, and that's how you actually submit data forms to another web page. So that's a big broad overview of what a couple different types of forms and how they work. So let's go ahead and get started and start to learn about the form tag itself. So the form tag is actually just going to be indicating specific information about that form. So it's going to have a couple different attributes on the inside of it. The first one is the action attribute. Now this is the URL where the server is located. As you can see here, I have a little placeholder. It's just called actionpage.php. Now that URL in this case is a PHP file. Now what PHP does is it's actually going to process this information on the server and then give me back something in return, or maybe post it to that server and save it. Now what determines that is the method attribute, and both of these are technically optional, but there are two methods for how you're actually going to be posting or receiving from that server. Now there is the post method where values are sent to the server. The post method can also use to be deleting any information on that server. So that is the post method, right? You'll begin posting information to that server. Then there is the get method, which values are received from the server, which is really important for when you're actually searching for things. So Google will use a lot of the method get because it's going to be receiving information from its servers. So those are the two differences. Remember, post is going to be getting information or sending information to that server and deleting it or adding it. And then the get method is going to be receiving information from that server, more specifically just about searching for specific things on that server. All right, so that's the form tag, and you use this form tag to open up a new form. You can actually go ahead, you don't need these two action or method attributes if you wanted to just have inputs that wouldn't be sent to a PHP file. Say that you were just manipulating things with JavaScript on that same page. You actually don't even need these, so that's something to keep in mind. However, if you are going to be running a large website that is going to have users and need to be able to sign in and authenticate things, you will need to have a PHP page, actions, methods, and all of those things. So let's go ahead and get on to the next thing, and that is the input tag. The input tag actually indicates the form control of that element. So there are a couple different form controls, types of form control that we have. We already talked about like text inputs, password inputs, radio buttons, checkboxes, and let's go ahead and go through that. So here's the basic syntax of an input tag. We have the type attribute, the name attribute, and the value attribute. Let's go through those individually now. So the type attribute indicates what type of input is going to be used, and that would be, the type could be text or password or radio or checkbox. There's also a couple other different types, but these are the four most useful ones, and as you can see here, the syntax is pretty straightforward. So this is just going to indicate how we are actually inputting that information. Then we have the name, which is the variable name sent to the server. That also could be the name that you are grabbing when you have a JavaScript script that is running on your HTML file. So keep that in mind. You can use that with JavaScript as well, but most times it is used and sent to the server. Then we have the value. Now, this name has this value. So the name and the value come in a pair. So it'd be quiz and then colon strongly agree. So the name would have the value strongly agree. So this is the value that is sent to the server, which is, it can also be used for default inputs of text inputs, but more specifically, you're going to have your variable name that's sent to the server and the associated value with it. So we'll have a name and then its associated value so that the server can distinguish what type of value that name has. So if you were selecting from multiple options for this quiz, you would have multiple values and they would all be part of the same quiz. So let's look at it. That's a little confusing. Let's look at an example here then. So this has a lot going on. Let's break it down step by step. So as you can see at the top, we have our form tag with the action attribute and the method post. So that's just what we talked about on the form tag example. We talked about these exact same. Next, we actually are going to use the text type here. So as you can see, I typed in username here, gave it a line break, which is how you can see this. Then I said input type equals text, gives me a text box. The name of this input is username because it's a username. And then I put a default value in there that shows up as enter username here. I also set the maximum length, which is just going to be how many characters you can actually put inside of this text box. You don't have to set that. I did that in this case so that people, don't have really crazy long usernames. Then I put another break because I don't want the next thing to come up to be on this same line as my text box. So the next thing I have is the password. Now the only thing here is that we're going to have the input type password and the name password because that makes sense. We want to make sure the server knows that this is a password. So the only difference between these two text boxes here is that the password text box is going to be hiding that information. So if you had enter username here, it would just show up those little black dots you're familiar with. So again, like I mentioned before, you've seen those little I buttons that if you click here, it shows you what your password is. All that's happening there is when you click on it, the type is being switched from password to text. That is the only thing that's happening. So that is a really pretty simple thing and can be done with just a little bit of JavaScript. So you can learn how to do that. Now, those are kind of boring in my opinion. Those inputs are a little boring. So let's go ahead and go on to the more interesting ones. So here we have a question. How cool are you? I have a line break to separate the inputs. Then I said input type radio, name is coolness, and the value is cool as a cucumber. Then I said, and then I wanted to print that outside of the tag, so I put cool as a cucumber out of that tag so that it'll show up to show that that option is corresponding to cool as a cucumber so the user can actually see it. If you didn't have this right here, this text right here that says cool as a cucumber, it would just be a dot, this little radio button, and a blank space next to it. So people could select the option, but they would have no idea what it stands for. So normally you should have the value correspond to what the actual text you're showing is because that'll make things easier. Then I have a couple different notice that there's more input types of radio. All of these have the same name though. They're all coolness. But they all three have different values. So you would get a coolness value depending on what radio button you select. So if you selected ice cold, the value of coolness would be ice cold. Or if you selected I am actually kind of warm, the value of coolness would be I am actually kind of warm. So those come in pairs. Notice that these are all going to be whatever coolness you are because that's answering the question. So how cool are you? We get the coolness value, the name, and the value coolness. So that way we know what it is. Then for the final one, another example is just using the checkbox method. What is your favorite food? And then I had all the names are the same, they're all interests, and then the values are different. So we would know what interest food they have based off of what buttons they check. So then we close out the form tag, and all of these would be in the same form. If we had a submit button, we would be able to submit all of these to this PHP URL right here. Now this PHP URL actually will not do anything because I haven't set it up. But if you did, you could also, instead of having a submit button, you could also create a button in JavaScript that if you clicked on it, it would have something else pop up and create an interactive maybe quiz or things like that. So JavaScript, you can also make a submit button of sorts. So that's an example with some of the basic form controls. So let's look at another example for a couple other inputs. Now, there's a couple other things. There's the multiple selector drop-down boxes that I mentioned. So these actually use not the input tag, but the select tag inside of the form tag. So this creates a drop-down list box element. You can control the size or the amount of options displayed within that box, and then you can also allow the user to select multiple options from the list. So after this, we're going to have the option tag on the inside for each of the options that you are going to be selecting from. So this is going to make more sense if I show you the example here. So if we say select name equals items, size 5, that's going to be how many show up. As you can see, there's 5. And we're going to say multiple, add the multiple attribute equals multiple so that they can select multiple. Then each of the options actually have there's a tag for each of the options. So the value is matches, type in matches, and it shows up. So each option that they can select from is going to have its own option tag and value, so that if they select it, you know what the value of that option is and what they are selecting. So in this case, we said, which 2 of these items would you take with you on a deserted island? And then they can select 2 of these, and we would know what value they selected based off of what they select, and we would know then what 2 items they would take. So that's kind of cool. Now, I know this was really quick, and I hope that you can go ahead and explore around with these. The only way to get familiar with these is by doing it. So go ahead and run some code and try to figure out how to use these. Remember, you don't necessarily have to have these action and method attributes. They are not 100% necessary. They are useful, though, if you are going to be running a large website. You can also do a similar thing to PHP with JavaScript, but PHP is going to be for large websites that you need servers. Okay, so just to summarize what we covered today, let's go ahead and talk about this. So form controls are the manner in which information is gathered from a website visitor. Now that could be text input or a password input or radio input or anything like that. And as you can see here, I made a little spelling mistake. Visitor, keep it brief here. Anyways, this other thing we learned is that form tag provides information about how the server will process that information. So we can get, depending on what URL we're sending the information to, what PHP, we will get something different, or what method we're using, the get or post. Then finally, there's the input tag, which specifies how the user will input their information, whether that's text or inputs, a radio input or a checkbox or a multiple select box. All of those are valid options. So this will actually be one of the final HTML basic videos. This is just one to cover some really basic HTML. We'll probably do an advanced link and images video here soon, just to show you some of the more cool features you can do with that. But from now on, you should probably start to learn more and more CSS. CSS is going to give you a lot more power over your website, and I know you're probably getting bored of just having plain content. So start learning some CSS, and some CSS videos will come out here soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.